It had been another grueling day. As lead programmer, I often found myself staying late, especially during crunch time. Tonight was no different. My team had been putting in long hours, and as their leader, I felt obligated to be there every step of the way. More often than not, I was the last one to leave the office. After setting the security system, I stepped into the chilly night air and made my way across the parking lot to my red BMW 650i coupe. My mind was still occupied with thoughts of our project. We were finally making progress. For the first time in weeks, the number of bugs had started to decline, and my team was keeping pace with the fixes. With a little luck, we'd have a gold master ready in 2 weeks. Halfway to my car, I became aware of footsteps approaching quickly from behind. Lost in my thoughts, I hadn't turned on my music, which would have drowned out the sound. When I turned to see who it was, I found myself staring at the barrel of a gun. Instinct kicked in. I ducked, but it was too late. The gun flashed, and a searing pain tore through my chest, just above my heart, shattering my shoulder. I fell back against the trunk of a parked car, my head striking it hard before I slid to the ground. I felt the second bullet slam into my rib, and my strength began to fade. Desperately, I fought to stay conscious, my thoughts racing to Sophie, my wife, and Olivia, our daughter. I prayed they'd forgive me for not being there, for all the years I'd sacrificed to work long hours instead of spending time with them. Shouts echoed in the distance, familiar voices I couldn't quite place. It didn't matter. The gun fired a third time, tearing into my left leg. The shooter turned and ran, leaving me crumpled and bleeding on the pavement. Moments later, I felt someone kneeling beside me. Through the haze of pain, I recognized Nora, our graphic designer, her voice urgent but unintelligible. Daniel, the assistant producer, and Steve, one of the AI programmers, soon joined her, their faces pale with worry. My vision dimmed further as I fought to stay awake, focusing on Nora's face until the world faded to black. I woke to the sound of muffled voices and searing pain in my chest. A man I didn't recognize leaned over me, holding defibrillator paddles. Somehow, he had brought me back. The next time I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. Pain radiated through my body, though it wasn't as unbearable as before. A nurse was by my side, gently flexing my injured leg. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and only a rasp escaped. She noticed I was awake and immediately called for the doctor. Over the next few hours, I learned I'd been in a long-term care facility for nearly 10 months. My body had been healing, but my life had been on pause. The staff told me my only visitor during that time had been Olivia, but she hadn't come in 6 months. She was listed as my next of kin, but there was no information about Sophie. The notes in my file mentioned that the police were to be contacted as soon as I woke up. Detectives Ethan Hayes and Dario Bosley arrived later that day. After introductions, they asked me to recount what I remembered from the night of the shooting. I shared everything: the sudden attack, the shots, the pain, and the moments before I blacked out. Then the questioning took an unexpected turn. "Mr. Blackwood," Detective Bosley began, "how long had you suspected your wife of having an affair?" I blinked, completely caught off guard. "An affair? What are you talking about? Where's my wife?" My voice was hoarse but indignant. "She'd never do that." Detective Hayes cut in with an apologetic tone. "I'm sorry to inform you, but your wife, Sophie, was having an affair. Her lover's name was Isaac Gall. Do you recognize the name?" The name was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. Then it hit me. He had been Olivia's middle school English teacher. "Yes," I said slowly, the realization sinking in. "He taught my daughter years ago." Hayes nodded. "That's correct. After losing that job over an inappropriate relationship with a high school student, he struggled to find teaching work. Eventually, he inherited a small coffee shop when his father passed. That's where we believe he and your wife reconnected." I felt as though the air had been knocked out of me. Sophie? My Sophie? The woman who had been my world, who I had sacrificed so much for. How could she betray me? "I still can't believe it," I muttered. "She loved their coffee, but I'd never have guessed." My voice trailed off. Hayes and Bosley exchanged a glance before pressing on. They explained that during their investigation, they had uncovered evidence that Sophie and Isaac had plotted my murder. Phone records showed Sophie calling Isaac shortly after I phoned her that night. Surveillance footage revealed him arriving near my office parking lot shortly after our call. She wanted you out of the picture, Hayes said bluntly. For the house, the cars, and $1 million life insurance policy she had taken out on you. I froze. Life insurance? I never signed anything like that. She forged your signature, Hayes confirmed. We traced the policy back to 2 years ago, which might indicate the affair started even earlier. Every word struck like another bullet. My wife, the woman I thought loved me, had planned to kill me with her lover. Anger, betrayal, and heartbreak surged through me as I processed the detective's words. She'd had an affair. Worse, she had plotted to kill me for him. I wrestled with the thought, part of me wanting to demand proof, demand to see the videos the detectives claimed they had. A part of me clung to the hope that they were wrong, that my daughter was wrong, that somehow this was all a horrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. The fact that she had run, leaving no trace, was damning enough. Still, questions haunted me. Why had she cheated? Was it because I wasn't around enough? Sophie had always told me she understood my long hours and appreciated the breaks we took after each project. The time off between releases was our time to reconnect as a family. This time would have been no different. I'd planned to take an entire month off when the project wrapped, combining my unused vacation days to give us December and January together. Maybe that was the problem. She knew I'd be around, and that would make it harder for her to sneak off with him. But then there was another, more painful question. Had she fallen in love with him? Maybe my absences had left a void she couldn't resist filling. Maybe his limited prospects made him more desperate, willing to hatch a plan to steal everything we'd built. But even that felt off. It didn't sound like the Sophie I thought I knew. And now, unless she was found, I might never know the truth. Even if they caught her, there was no guarantee she'd tell me. I realized I had to focus on what I could control, getting better and being there for my daughter Olivia. She was what mattered now. Olivia returned from her conversation with the doctor, and we shifted to lighter topics. She told me about her classes, her projects, and where her friends had ended up after high school. She painted vivid pictures of her adventures in Seattle, cheering for the Huskies at football games, watching the Thunderbirds on the ice, and exploring the city with her new friends. It was comforting, hearing her talk about her life. It reminded me that despite everything, she was thriving. Later, Nora, our graphic designer, joined us. She came bearing gossip from the office, updates on the game we'd been working on before my shooting, and the sequel to my last hit. Apparently, things hadn't been going smoothly. Daniel had left for a producer role in the Bay Area, exposing how much of the team's management had fallen on him. Mike, the lead producer, was now struggling to train Daniel's replacement, someone he'd personally hired, despite their lack of experience in the gaming industry. Nora confided that she was thinking about leaving to start her own venture, which made me wonder if she'd stayed this long out of loyalty to support us. A few hours passed, and yawns started to punctuate our conversation. As they prepared to leave, I asked Olivia, "Did you come straight here from the airport?" "Yes, Dad," she replied. "Where's your suitcase?" "At the nurse's station." "Okay. Love you. See you tomorrow." "Love you too," Olivia said with a warm smile. Nora chimed in with a playful grin. "Love you too." Olivia laughed as she walked out, missing Nora blowing me a cheeky kiss before following her. It turned out I'd woken up at the perfect time for Olivia. It was the start of her reading week, right before exams. She arranged to have her exams proctored at a nearby state university so she could stay with me. Though it meant late nights to match her classmates' schedule, she didn't seem to mind. We spent those days together. Olivia worked on her laptop or pored over her textbooks, occasionally asking me to quiz her. I offered advice on problem-solving techniques and strategies, relishing the chance to help. For a while, I could ignore why I was in the hospital and simply enjoy being with my daughter. It felt like we were closer than ever. Physical therapy, on the other hand, was brutal. Those first 2 weeks were grueling, with shaky steps down a parallel bar leaving me drained. But it paid off. I was cleared to go home just in time for Thanksgiving. Olivia and I spent the holiday together at a nearby hotel, sharing a quiet meal. Nora had gone to Florida to visit her family, leaving the house eerily empty. Returning home, I expected to feel some sense of comfort, but instead, it felt like stepping into a crime scene. Every room seemed haunted by the ghosts of Sophie's betrayal. I avoided the master bedroom entirely, opting for the guest room. Somehow, Nora's lingering scent in that space felt more comforting than the echoes of Sophie's presence in the rest of the house. By the next day, I knew I couldn't stay. I called a real estate agent and began the process of selling the house. He warned me it might take months, especially this time of year, but I didn't care. I needed a clean break. By Tuesday, Nora had brought over a console and a work laptop, and I was officially back in the saddle. It felt good, even if I wasn't physically in the office yet. Olivia helped too, sitting with me in the afternoons, discussing solutions to various problems. It was the most fun I'd had in months. Wednesday morning, we said a tearful goodbye as I dropped her off at the airport. She didn't want to leave, and I didn't want to let her go. But she promised to return soon for Christmas, and I started considering a change of scenery myself. Maybe I'd join her out west once I found a new job. Christmas was quiet but wonderful, just Olivia and me. We even went to a Flyers game in Philadelphia on the 27th, a gift from her to me. When she returned to school after the new year, Nora came back from Florida, and my routine settled into something manageable. I was down to weekly physio sessions, and I started feeling like myself again. One day, the police returned the camera system they'd recovered from the house. They had traced its origin to a Costco in Baltimore, but the trail went cold when the system was returned and resold for cash. I debated whether to look at the footage, but eventually gave in, downloading outdated software from an abandonware site to make the system work. What I saw confirmed everything the detectives had told me, and shattered whatever lingering doubts I had. Sophie had greeted Isaac at the door that night, pulling a gun from a Spider-Man book bag. She told him to make it quick and painless. What followed was a disgusting display of affection, culminating in candid scenes across almost every room in the house, even in my car. By the time I was done watching, I felt sick. The house wasn't just haunted, it was tainted. I needed to be out, and I needed to replace my car. I threw myself into packing, starting with Sophie's belongings. Once boxed, they went straight to a Salvation Army store. A kind old man called me later, saying he'd found $100 in one of her jeans pockets and asking if I wanted it returned. I told him to donate it. Every box I moved, every item I discarded, felt like an exorcism. I was determined to cleanse my life of Sophie's betrayal and finally move on. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let us know in the comments. The first meeting with my lawyer was a disaster. Without knowing Sophie's whereabouts, a quick divorce was off the table. Instead of a straightforward filing, I faced months of delays, needing to file Freedom of Information Act requests to search for her. This, despite the fact that law enforcement was already actively looking for her as part of an open investigation. I left the lawyer's office in a rage, my frustration boiling over. I yelled at the world, venting my anger at anything inanimate that couldn't yell back. By the time Olivia came home for summer break, the house had finally sold. I'd also secured a new job, working for the so-called evil empire in Redmond, Microsoft, or the Borg, as other professionals in the area half-jokingly called it. My new role was vague. I only knew I'd be joining a team that had previously worked on the Xbox Kinect. The interview process, which had required 3 trips to Seattle, was grueling but gave me the added bonus of seeing Olivia during her spring break. Those trips also brought me into contact with Professor Susan Shikongo. She was the daughter of a Namibian refugee and had just accepted a position at the University of Washington. We met in the hotel elevator, quite literally bumping into each other as I stepped off and she stepped on. Our laughter led to drinks at the bar, and later, an invitation to her room. Susan was everything Sophie hadn't been: passionate, assertive, and unapologetic. She made me feel alive in ways I hadn't realized I'd been missing. As the night unfolded, comparisons between her and Sophie crept into my mind. I couldn't help but remember how submissive Sophie had been with me, yet wild and uninhibited with her lover, as I'd seen on the cursed footage. She held me, listened as I poured out my story, and stayed up with me until dawn. As the first light of day broke through the curtains, we made love again. This time slow and deliberate, a rare intimacy I hadn't felt since Sophie. We shared breakfast before saying our goodbyes, but not before exchanging contact information. On my flight home, I was surprised to find emails from her already waiting, complete with photos and notes about the condos and houses she toured that day. For the first time in a long while, I felt happy. That happiness didn't last long. When I returned home, Nora greeted me with her usual warmth, but her sharp eye quickly picked up on the change in me. I told her about meeting Susan and how we'd connected. She smiled and said she was happy for me, then excused herself, mentioning a date with her boyfriend. That night, and for the next 2 weeks, she didn't come back to the house when I was there. A week later, I learned through the office grapevine that Nora had handed in her 2 weeks' notice. On her last day, she showed up at the house with a U-Haul, loaded her belongings, and left. Watching her drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost something important, though I couldn't put my finger on it. 2 weeks later, movers arrived to pack up my things. They would transport everything to Seattle while I stayed in a hotel near Pittsburgh Airport for my last night in the state. Microsoft provided me with temporary housing in Redmond for my first month, giving me time to decide where I wanted to live permanently. I eventually settled on a 3-bedroom apartment near Marymore Park. Susan lived nearby, in a small house on the other side of the park. We began dating, seeing each other a few times a week. Sunday mornings were reserved for pickup soccer games at the park, where she consistently outplayed me and most of the other guys. She was quick and skillful, even holding her own against the younger players. Despite the fun we shared, it didn't last. Susan confessed that I wasn't fully hers, that someone else still had my heart. I denied it, claiming I was over Sophie, but deep down, I knew she was right. The end came abruptly. In the lead-up to Christmas, Susan made sure I caught her in bed with one of her students. In her house, no less, a house I had begun to think of as ours. The betrayal crushed me, but it also left me resolute. I'd had enough of women, relationships, and heartbreak. I resolved to focus on my daughter, my work, and rediscovering myself. In January, I bought a house in Kirkland, finally putting down roots. It was a 4-bedroom place with a converted garage that the previous owner had used as a startup office. The backyard featured a small garden and a pool, something I figured Olivia might enjoy when she visited. I spent the following weeks unpacking and settling in, though the house felt eerily empty. Movers were scheduled to bring the rest of my belongings out of storage, but I dreaded what memories those items might dredge up. One Sunday evening, I came home from work to find a blue Ford Focus parked in my driveway. As I stepped out of my car, the driver's door opened, and a pair of legs swung out. Legs I recognized instantly. They were Nora's, but for the first time, I found myself captivated by them. Before I could gather my thoughts, a distinct male cough drew my attention. Standing on the other side of the car, with a smug grin, was Daniel. My mind raced. Were they together? Why did that thought sting so much? William, God, I've missed you, Daniel said, pulling me into a hug. It's so good to see you up and moving. Good to see you too, Daniel, I replied, though my eyes kept drifting back to Nora. She missed you too, Daniel whispered with a knowing look. Are you too? I asked, nodding between them. Daniel laughed. I wish. Boy, do I wish. What are you boys whispering about? Nora asked, approaching with a teasing smile. Nothing, Daniel and I said in unison. How's Susan? Nora asked, her tone casual but her eyes searching mine. No idea. We split up. Nora's face lit up. Good. She wasn't right for you anyway. Well, she cheated. So at least this one didn't leave me with any extra holes. With a mischievous smile, Nora replied, You just need to let the right woman decide you're right for her, instead of the other way around. Is that right? I asked. Do you know a woman who wants me? Her response was swift. She closed the distance between us, pressing herself against me, and kissed me with a passion that left no room for doubt. When we finally broke apart, I heard Olivia's voice calling out, It's about time. Nora caught my dazed expression and smirked, which quickly turned into a full-blown laugh. Go take a shower, she teased. Maybe it'll bring you back to your senses. I nodded dumbly and slid off the bed, stumbling when my heel caught on something. My book. How had that ended up on the floor? I didn't remember dropping it. As I passed Nora, the scent of my shampoo and soap clung to her, and something about it made her even more captivating. It hit me in that moment. She wasn't just someone in my life. She was mine, and I was hers. At the doorway, I turned back and kissed her neck gently, letting the love I felt pour into that single act. She leaned against the frame with a soft groan as I whispered, "Whose senses are overloaded now?" Dropping my clothes on top of hers in the hamper, I noticed a certain reaction I'd had to her presence. I couldn't blame myself. She was stunning in every way, mind, body, and soul. The warmth of the shower helped at first, but thoughts of Nora kept creeping in, and before I knew it, the hot water wasn't helping anymore. I twisted the knob to cold, gasping as the icy blast shocked me back to my senses. When I returned to the bedroom, Nora greeted me with a warm kiss, pulling away only to take my hand and guide me to the bed. She wrapped her arms around me, resting her head against my chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly at home. There was a rightness to it, something more real and profound than I'd ever felt before. Not even with Sophie. We stood there in quiet intimacy, soaking in the moment. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, we fell onto the bed, our hands exploring one another with a sense of wonder and care. I focused entirely on her scent, her touch, the way her breath hitched at every kiss. Her emotions spilled out in cries of joy and surprise, and I matched her energy, determined to make her feel cherished and safe. At one point, she pulled my hand to hers, and our eyes locked in a moment of deep understanding. "I've never felt like this before," she murmured breathlessly. "It's overwhelming, but in the best way." I chuckled softly. "You've shown me something new too. This connection, it's incredible." Her laughter was soft, but it lit up the room. "Come here," she whispered, and I leaned in for a kiss, feeling the warmth of her smile against my lips. The next morning, I woke in the exact same position, which presented a slight problem. I needed to use the bathroom. Lifting my head, I found myself staring into Nora's deep blue eyes, sparkling with joy and love. "Round two?" she asked with a playful grin. "I'd love to, my love," I replied. "But first I need to, relieve myself." She laughed, lifting herself off me to let me go. When I returned, we made love again. Slow, passionate, and deeply intimate. Afterward, we shared a shower, letting the warmth and closeness carry us into the new day. At breakfast, Olivia greeted us with a smirk. "He didn't kill you then?" I almost called 911 at one point. She winked at Nora and added in a stage whisper, "Was it everything you hoped for?" Nora leaned over to kiss Olivia on the cheek, then whispered something in her ear. Whatever it was, it made Olivia beam, her grin practically glowing. I opened the user control panel on Olivia's old laptop and reset Ryan's account password. Rebooting, I logged in under his name, half expecting to find nothing of interest. Instead, I was greeted with a desktop that practically screamed, "Careless idiot." I hesitated, dreading what I might find, but curiosity won. Clicking on the first thumbnail, I was greeted with a video of my former master bedroom. Standing naked at the foot of the bed was Olivia's former teacher, Isaac Gall. Sitting on the edge of the bed beside him, also naked, was Sophie, my ex. The next video showed the two of them in Olivia's bedroom. The one after that? Back in my room. And another? They were in the basement, with Sophie dressed up like a student, complete with pigtails and a school uniform. Olivia gasped. "Oh my God." I barely heard her. The videos kept coming. An overwhelming, horrifying confirmation of everything I didn't want to believe. I noticed a sickening pattern. 1 out of every 5 videos featured Sophie and me, spliced in with her affairs. As I scrolled, it became painfully clear when the affair began. The earlier videos only showed Sophie and me. Then, a face I didn't expect appeared in the footage. Our neighbor, Terry Mansfield. Sophie had been with him, too. Further down, more faces appeared, Liam Bennett, a former colleague, included. My stomach churned as I recalled the rumor that Liam had been fired after the company's owner found him in bed with his wife, Chloe. Now I realized how close I'd come to being pulled into that drama. But the worst discovery came at the bottom of the library. The laptop screen slammed, shut with a force that echoed through the room. I'll call the police, I said, breaking the suffocating silence. Detective still had the same number. Though Sophie's case had gone cold, he immediately perked up when I mentioned the footage. The videos offered a fresh lead, as well as a witness he admitted they hadn't pursued thoroughly. He promised to follow up. A month later, he called back. "Mister," he began, "could you return to Pennsylvania? We've located your wife." "Is this a break in the case?" I asked cautiously. "In a way," he replied. "Ryan been arrested on more charges than I've ever seen. It might set a state record. And Sophie, she wants to see you." I froze. She wants to see me? What about charges against her? Hayes hesitated. "The district attorney isn't pressing charges." "What?" I yelled. "You have her on video conspiring to have me killed." "She's not well enough to stand trial," Hayes explained. "The doctors don't think she ever will be. You need to see for yourself." His tone was grave, and the implication clear. This wasn't the Sophie I had known. I hung up, shared the news with Nora, Olivia, and we all agreed I should go. A week later, I flew back to Pennsylvania with Olivia and Nora by my side. The directions led us to a state hospital. At reception, we were directed to a secure ward, where a nurse had us wait for Sophie's doctor. The doctor ushered us into his office and began listing Sophie's injuries. She'd lost her left eye, her right leg had healed poorly from a break and would need to be rebroken and reset, and long-term malnutrition had left her with numerous other health issues. The physical injuries were staggering, but it was her mental state that was most alarming. "She's been through prolonged abuse," the doctor explained. "Used as a slave, subjected to constant torment. She's had nothing but time to dwell on the horror, and she's unable to cope with freedom. It'll take years, if ever, for her to function normally again." When we finally saw Sophie, the shell of the woman before us was unrecognizable. Nora squeezed my hand tightly, grounding me. Olivia, stoic but pale, insisted on helping however she could. Sophie had no one else. Olivia was her only family. A year later, Nora and I were married on a quiet beach in Florida near her parents' home. They welcomed Olivia with open arms, embracing her as the granddaughter they'd always wanted. Olivia loved having grandparents, especially since she didn't remember my parents well. 6 months after our wedding, we discovered Nora was pregnant, with twins, a boy and a girl. We haven't settled on names yet, which is becoming a bit urgent since they're due next month. Olivia is thriving, though I've had to talk her into finishing her degree a few times. She's already a paper millionaire, if not more, thanks to her shares in the company. Sophie now lives next door to us. Amelia insisted on being involved in her care, and I couldn't refuse. Sophie is making progress, albeit slow. What would you have done with my ex-wife if you were in my shoes? Let us know in the comments. Most days, we manage to keep her dressed, though she's not ready to re-enter the world yet. The University of Washington has partnered with us to provide her treatment, and in exchange, I teach a game development class there. It's a win-win. I get to mentor students and scout future talent for our growing team. Subscribe to the channel for new videos.